Hello, my name is Austin Habish, the founder of Think Catholic, and you're listening to the Summa Theologiae podcast, where we study St. Thomas Aquinas' Summa Theologiae in a way simple and insightful for anyone to understand. The Summa Theologiae podcast is brought to you by Think Catholic. Taking 2 questions of the Summa a day, we'll seek to summarize St. Thomas's responses, discovering the brilliance of Aquinas and his Catholic faith is day 179. So let's get started. We're covering today questions 122, 123 of the Secundae, that is, of the precepts of justice and of fortitude. The translation that I always use in these podcasts is the one generously provided to me by Ave Maria Press, the 5-volume set translated by the Fathers of the English Dominican province, which you can now get at a discounted price from Ave Maria Press's site by typing in the code Summa 10. And so here we go. Article 1. Whether the precepts of the decalogue are precepts of justice. Justice pertains to rights, duties, debts that need to be paid, and this is what we find in the decalogue, or the 10 commandments, the duties towards our Creator, towards our superiors and our equals. And this is also the order of the decalogue itself, as St. Thomas tells us. The first 3 precepts are about acts of religion, the 4th precept is about acts of piety, and the 6 remaining are about justice, commonly so called, which is observed among equals. Therefore, in response to Article, the 10 Commandments are precepts of justice. Article 2, whether the first precept of the Decalogue is fittingly expressed. The law is meant to be our guide and teacher, and therefore, just as the captain of a ship should begin by describing the destination to his crew before describing the path to get there, so too the commandments begin with the goal of humankind, which is to know and love God. As it is written in Exodus, I am the Lord your God, who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of bondage. You shall have no other gods before me. In other words, the law is commanding us to have one ultimate destination, which is the Lord, the one true God who revealed himself to Moses, and that we shall place nothing before him. Contained within this first commandment, then, is both our ultimate goal, along with a warning against our greatest obstacle, which is idolatry. For as we've said back in episodes 60 and 61, every man does have something for which everything else is done for the sake of, and that is his God. And we must ensure that our God is the Lord and not something else. As Jesus said, no one can serve 2 masters, for either he will hate the one and love the other, or he will be devoted to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve God and mammon. Article 3, whether the second precept of the Decalogue is fittingly expressed. After detailing the destination of man, the one true God who revealed himself to Moses, the Lord, and having warned us against the vice opposed to true religion by means of excess, which is superstition, the greatest of which is idolatry. Now, in the second commandment, God warns us against the vice opposed to true religion by way of deficiency, which is called irreligion, and indicated by the second commandment in the following words, You shall not take the name of the Lord your God in vain, for the Lord will not hold him guiltless who takes his name in vain. Article 4, whether the third precept of the Decalogue concerning the hallowing of the Sabbath is fittingly expressed. Having discussed our ultimate destination, how to avoid excess and deficiency in regard to it, generally speaking, now we receive the specific manner in observing that first commandment, which is indicated in the third commandment, where it is written, Remember the Sabbath day, to keep it holy. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work, but the 7th day is a Sabbath to the Lord your God. For in 6 days the Lord made heaven and earth, the sea and all that is in them, and rested the 7th day. Therefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and hallowed it. We are to worship the true God, and first and foremost out of a heart of gratitude and thanksgiving for creation, which is totally gratuitous and of which all men everywhere and always bear a debt of gratitude for. As a general precept within this commandment falls all the other precepts relating to right worship as given both in the time before Jesus and after Jesus, and now given by Christ through the church, which is why the observance of the Sabbath was fulfilled, and now the observance of the Lord's Day, the day of the resurrection, which is on Sunday and not on Saturday. As Aquinas writes, in the new law, the observance of the Lord's Day took the place of the observance of the Sabbath, not by virtue of the precept, but by the institution of the church and the custom of the Christian people. And then lastly, as a final note, when it comes to rest on that day, what is not required is that a person drop everything, but that they should earnestly seek to drop everything not in some way connected to the service of God. As Aquinas tells us, according to Jesus in John chapter 7, verse 23, a man receives circumcision on the Sabbath day, that the law of Moses may not be broken. And for this reason, too, we read in Matthew chapter 12 that on the Sabbath days, the priests in the temple break the Sabbath, i.e., do corporal works on the Sabbath and are without blame. Accordingly, the priests in carrying the ark on the Sabbath did not break the precept of the Sabbath observance. In like manner, it is not contrary to the observance of the Sabbath to exercise any spiritual act, such as teaching by word or writing. Article 5, whether the fourth precept about honoring one's parents is fittingly expressed. After commanding us to love our true end, which is God, along with the direct means to do so, worship, and whatever is related to worship, along with how to avoid the pitfalls of superstition and irreligion, next the decalogue fittingly teaches us how to interact with others, and beginning with those whom we encounter first and whom we owe the most. That is our parents, as it is written, honor your father and your mother, that your days may be long in the land which the Lord your God gives you. This commandment also in a general way encompasses all those whom we owe an especial debt to, which is why rendering to our parents falls under piety. After this, the decalogue will describe what we owe to all men generally. But before getting to that, which is our next article, St. Thomas responds to our present article here in writing. The precepts of the decalogue are directed to the love of God and of our neighbor. Now to our parents, of all our neighbors, we are under the greatest obligation. Hence, immediately after the precepts directing us to God, a place is given to the precept directing us to our parents, who are the particular principle of our being, just as God is the universal principle, so that this precept has a certain affinity to the precepts of the first table. Article 6, whether the other 6 precepts of the decalogue are fittingly expressed. And they are fittingly expressed because they represent, in a kind of jointly exhaustive way, all the categories of evils we can do to another. We can do evil against a person directly, which is represented and prohibited in the words, thou shalt not kill. We can do evil against others connected to that person, to which the law says, thou shalt not commit adultery, thou shalt not covet thy neighbor's wife. We can do evil against a person's material possessions, to which it is commanded, thou shalt not steal, thou shalt not covet thy neighbor's goods. And lastly, we can do evil against a person's spiritual goods, like their good name, their knowledge of the truth, to which it is commanded, thou shalt not bear false witness. And now we turn to question 123 of Fortitude. Article 1, whether fortitude is a virtue. Virtues make a man good and his work good, as we've said already before. Virtues which perfect a man's capacity to reason correctly are called intellectual virtues. Other virtues perfect a man's capacity to will correctly in regard to others, such as justice. And some virtues make a man good and his actions good by removing that which might prove a hindrance to virtuous action. And this is what fortitude and temperance do specifically. Fortitude, considered generally, helps a man hold on to the proper good when his passions sway him to let it go, and temperance, considered generically or generally, helps a man forego an improper good when his passions sway him to seize it. In St. Thomas's words, being drawn by some object of pleasure to something other than what the rectitude of reason requires, this obstacle is removed by the virtue of temperance. Secondly, through the will being disinclined to follow that which is in accordance with reason on account of some difficulty that presents itself. In order to remove this obstacle, fortitude of the mind is requisite. Article 2, whether fortitude is a special virtue. Fortitude can be understood as a general virtue, as we have said, as the quality in a man to remain firm in the good, even amidst fear and pain, but it can be considered as a specific virtue on its own as the habit of remaining firm in the midst of grave physical dangers, like the danger of death. Article 3, whether fortitude is about fear and daring. In a sentence from St. Thomas, fortitude is chiefly about fear of difficult things, which can withdraw the will from following the reason, and it behooves one not only firmly to bear the assault of these difficulties by restraining fear, but also moderately to withstand them when, to wit, it is necessary to dispel them. Therefore, fortitude is about fear and daring, as curbing fear and moderating daring. Article 4, whether fortitude is only about dangers of death. As a specific virtue, it is specifically concerned with holding firm to the good of reason in face of the greatest of evils, which is death, and a man should be prepared to make such a decision if the occasion arises. As Aquinas writes, it behooves one to hold firmly the good of reason against every evil whatsoever, since no bodily good is equivalent to the good of reason. So if conscience judges that the right thing to do is to lay down one's life for his brother in war, or to lay down his life as a martyr for Christ under persecution, then he needs to follow his conscience, even if it costs him his physical life. Article 5, whether fortitude is properly about dangers of death in battle. The nuance added in this article to what we said in the last article is that there are some dangers of death which are really not under the purview of fortitude specifically. For one could be in danger of death driving a car or flying in a plane. Cancer may bring one into danger with death. These are not what Aquinas and Aristotle have in mind when it comes to the kind of fear which fortitude moderates. Fortitude moderates the fear of dying in war or in combat with another private citizen who may oppose the just action or pronounced judgments of the just man. These things require fortitude and are about dangers of death in battle. Article 6, whether endurance is the chief act of fortitude. If fortitude moderates fear and daring, which are emotions, which we covered at length earlier in the Summa, the question here is whether fortitude is more directed to the former emotion or the latter. And Aquinas will argue here that since the impending evil itself serves as a check to the emotion of daring, then fortitude is more about restraining fear than curbing daring. Thus, in response to our article, endurance, or remaining set on the good in spite of arising fear, is the chief act of fortitude. Article 7, whether the brave man acts for the sake of the good of his habit. Sometimes the reason for acting bravely is simply for the sake of doing so. It's not even the good one happens to be pursuing that motivates a man to act bravely. It is the nature of being brave itself that the brave man is aiming at or being motivated by, at least proximately. That's the word Aquinas uses here. St. Thomas's response is very brief, it's very deep. He argues that every creature's effects are similar to themselves. And we know this must be true because act follows being and because there can never be more in the effect than in its cause. For example, I cannot create Japanese-speaking students because I do not myself speak Japanese. And just as fire naturally tends to make things similar to itself, so too the virtuous man's effects are similar to himself. So here, the brave man acts for his good habit. His acts correspond to his habit. This is called the proximate end of the agent. Proximate, and that causes affect things similar to themselves. In the words of the article, a brave man acts for the sake of his good habit. And the remote end is that everything we do, even the brave act, we do for the sake of some ultimate end. Article 8, whether the brave man delights in his act. The brave man delights in possessing the good of carrying out the right thing to do, acting virtuously. But this joy can be blunted by physical pain unless supplemented by the grace of God in one's soul, as it is written here. Thus the blessed Tiburtius, while walking barefoot on the burning coal, said that he felt as though he were walking on roses. However, as St. Thomas concludes, even if one cannot feel the spiritual delight of fortitude in the midst of physical pain, his virtue is sufficient to keep him on the straight and narrow. As he says, the virtue of fortitude prevents the reason from being entirely overcome by bodily pain, and the delight of virtue overcomes spiritual sorrow, inasmuch as a man prefers the good of virtue to the life of the body and to whatever appertains thereto. Article 9, whether fortitude deals chiefly with sudden occurrences. The courageous man may foresee certain dangers and plan to struggle against them, but fortitude is chiefly seen, displayed, expressed as a virtue, as a habit, when one is caught off guard and still acts virtuously. Because when we are surprised, we act in a pseudo-instinctual way, and habits are like a second nature. They are a quality on us that confirms us and a certain way of thinking and willing. And so in this way, we can say that fortitude does chiefly deal with sudden occurrences. Article 10, whether the brave man makes use of anger in his action. As Aristotle wrote, anger helps the brave. We possess the passion of anger precisely to assist us in confronting obstacles and threats. And so just like a swordsman ought to use his sword in battle, so too the brave man makes use of anger in his action, inasmuch, of course, as it is required, with no more and no less of that passion than virtue demands. Article 11, whether fortitude is a cardinal virtue. And this is a really important article for understanding virtue, why virtues like fortitude, justice, temperance, prudence are called cardinal virtues. And it's not because all the virtues which have to do with abstaining from pleasures are a kind of temperance, a species of temperance, for this is not the case. And when it comes to fortitude, it's not because every virtue which has to do with persevering in the good amidst fear and pain are kinds of fortitude. It is because temperance has to do with the most intense of physical pleasures, those of touch. And fortitude has to do with the most intense of physical fears, which is death. That is why we demarcate these virtues as the head or the cardinal virtue of those similar and relating to them. St. Thomas writes here in response to our article, we perceive that even the most untamed beasts are deterred from the greatest pleasures by fear of pain. And among the pains of the mind and dangers, those are mostly feared which lead to death, and it is against them that the brave man stands firm. Therefore, fortitude is a cardinal virtue. Article 12, in our last article, whether fortitude excels among all other virtues, and this is not the case. Giving the last word in our article to Aquinas, he writes, prudence, since it is a perfection of reason, as the good essentially, while justice affects this good, since it belongs to justice to establish the order of reason in all human affairs, whereas the other virtues safeguard this good, inasmuch as they moderate the passions, lest they lead man away from reason's good. As to the order of the latter, fortitude holds the first place because fears of danger of death have the greatest power to make man recede from the good of reason, and after fortitude comes temperance, since also pleasures of touch excel all others in hindering the good of reason. Therefore, among the cardinal virtues, prudence ranks first, justice second, fortitude third, temperance fourth, and after these, the other virtues. Which brings us to the close of another episode. We have just finished covering questions 122, 123 of the Secunda Secundae, that is, of the precepts of justice and of fortitude. My name is Austin Habish with Think Catholic, and I cannot wait to see you tomorrow.